Namaskar and welcome. I'm Shubhendu Ghosh. This is the voice of the Global South. All right then, let's get started on the show this week. A closer look at the key outcomes of Prime Minister Narendra Modi's historic five-nation tour, how it marked a mega outreach to the Global South. Meanwhile, in Kenya, anti-government protests have turned deadly. President William Ruto's shoot-in-the-leg order for protesters has sparked outrage. The Dalai Lama celebrated his 90th birthday. The iconic Buddhist leader confirms he will have a successor after death. The question is, how do we find him or her? All that and more coming up on Voice of the Global South. And Prime Minister Narendra Modi this week concluded the historic five-nation visit. In a span of about 8 days, Prime Minister travelled across continents to Ghana in Africa, then Trinidad and Tobago in the Caribbean, Argentina and Brazil in Latin America. He also participated in the BRICS summit in Brazil, and then he was back in Africa as Namibia was the final stop before returning home. There were many milestones in Prime Minister's visit, multilateral, bilateral and personal. Also, each visit marked an important opportunity to garner solidarity against the menace of terrorism. It all came together to define India's mega outreach to the Global South. Let's first talk about the 17th BRICS summit hosted by Brazil. This was an expanded BRICS grouping with 11 member countries. Prime Minister Narendra Modi joined leaders of the member and partner countries in Rio de Janeiro. The theme of the summit was strengthening Global South cooperation for a more inclusive and sustainable governance. The joint declaration of the 17th BRICS summit supported India's concerns over terrorism and also hailed the nation's role in the rise of the Global South. BRICS strongly condemned the Pahalgam terrorist attack in Jammu and Kashmir on April 22nd this year, during which 26 innocent civilians were killed. The grouping supported aspirations of Brazil and India to play a greater role in the United Nations, including its Security Council. BRICS recognized India's leadership in the domain of innovation with BRICS Startup Forum to foster collaboration and deeper engagement among startup ecosystems of BRICS countries. It appreciated India's efforts for organizing capacity building sessions on digital transformation. Also, role of presidencies of Indonesia, India, Brazil, South Africa in shaping the G20 agenda also found a special mention. It expressed optimism on India taking over as the chair of the BRICS next year, and India's candidacy to host COP33 climate summit in 2028. BRICS adopted 126 commitments covering global governance, finance, health, artificial intelligence, climate change and other strategic areas. BRICS leaders also spoke in one voice on key global developments. They condemned the recent military strikes against Iran, which constituted a violation of international law and the Charter of the United Nations. BRICS voiced serious concerns about Trump tariffs. It said indiscriminate rising of tariffs, non-tariff measures or protectionism threatens to further reduce global trade and disrupt global supply chains. Also called for unconditional Gaza ceasefire and pushed for entry of humanitarian aid into the territory. In the five-nation visit, Prime Minister Modi's first stop was Ghana. He became the first Indian Prime Minister to visit the West African nation in 30 years. Prime Minister Modi held a bilateral meeting with President of Ghana, John Mahama. India and Ghana signed 4 key agreements spanning culture, traditional medicine and more.
हमारा द्विपक्षीय व्यापार $3 बिलियन पार कर चुका है। भारतीय कंपनियों ने लगभग 900 प्रोजेक्ट्स में लगभग $2 बिलियन का निवेश किया है। आज हमने आपसी व्यापार को अगले 5 वर्षों में दोगुना करने का लक्ष्य निर्धारित किया है। फिनटेक के क्षेत्र में भारत यूपीआई डिजिटल पेमेंट का अनुभव घाना के साथ साझा करने के लिए तैयार है। फ्रेंड, डेवलपमेंट पार्टनरशिप हमारी साझेदारी का एक मूल स्तंभ है। राष्ट्रपति महामा के आर्थिक पुनर्गठन के प्रयासों में भारत के पूर्ण समर्थन और सहयोग का हम आश्वासन देते हैं।
And Prime Minister Modi was conferred Ghana's highest civilian honor, the Officer of the Order of the Star of Ghana. He was recognized for distinguished statesmanship and influential global leadership. During his visit, Prime Minister Modi also addressed a special session of Parliament of Ghana, underlining that a strong and stable India is vital for a prosperous world. He also said no meaningful progress is possible without giving voice to the global south.
The world is also facing new and complex crises such as climate change, pandemics, terrorism, and cybersecurity. Institutions created in the last century are struggling to respond. The changing circumstances demand credible and effective reforms in global governance. Progress cannot come without giving voice to the global south. We need more than slogans. We need action. That is why during India's G20 presidency, we worked with the vision, one earth, one family, one future.
Prime Minister Narendra Modi's next stop was Caribbean twin island nation of Trinidad and Tobago. India shares deep-rooted historical, cultural and people-to-people connect with this Caribbean country. India signed 6 MOUs with Trinidad and Tobago, including one on making quality medicines available to the Caribbean island at affordable prices. In a special ceremony in Port of Spain, President of Trinidad and Tobago, Christine Carla Kangalu, conferred upon Prime Minister Modi the highest national award of Trinidad and Tobago, the Order of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, for his statesmanship. And Prime Minister Modi became the first Indian leader to address the Parliament of Trinidad and Tobago. He said India's priority will always be Global South, and that as the fastest growing major economy, it understands its responsibility towards others.
Our vision for such inclusive growth does not stop at our borders. We see our development also as a responsibility towards others, and our priority will always be the Global South. With the same spirit, we are deepening our relations with Trinidad and Tobago. Our trade will continue to grow. We will encourage our businesses to invest more in this country. Our development partnership will expand. Training capacity, building, and skill development will keep human development as its center. Health has been and will remain a key part of our partnership.
And in the third leg of the five-nation visit, Prime Minister Modi visited Argentina, the first bilateral visit by an Indian Prime Minister to the Latin American nation in 57 years. In Argentina, Prime Minister held wide-ranging talks with President Javier Milei in Buenos Aires. Both leaders pledged to expand cooperation in trade, technology, defense, health and space, reinforcing a growing strategic partnership. During his visit, Prime Minister Modi paid tributes at the San Martin Memorial in Buenos Aires. The monument of General San Martin honors the revered liberator of Argentina, Chile and Peru, stands as a symbol of Latin American independence and is a significant site of national pride in Argentina. Prime Minister Modi's visit to the memorial underscores India's respect for global freedom fighters. Prime Minister Modi also paid floral tributes to Mahatma Gandhi in Buenos Aires. From Buenos Aires in Argentina, Prime Minister traveled to Rio de Janeiro in Brazil to attend the 17th BRICS Summit that we talked about earlier. His next stop was Brasilia in Brazil for bilateral engagements at the invitation of President Lula da Silva. The leaders discussed cooperation in areas of trade, investment, defense and security, health and pharmaceuticals, space, renewable energy, agriculture and food processing, energy security, infrastructure development, digital public infrastructure and UPI, traditional medicine, yoga, sporting links and culture with people-to-people ties. They also explored avenues for collaboration in new areas of cooperation such as critical minerals, new and emerging technologies, artificial intelligence and supercomputers, digital collaboration and mobility. The leaders set a target to increase bilateral trade to $20 billion over the next 5 years. In his address in Brasilia, Prime Minister highlighted the role that Brazil and India can play for the global South. He called out the double standards on terrorism as well.
वैश्विक स्तर पर भारत और ब्राजील ने सदैव करीबी समन्वय के साथ काम किया है। दो बड़े लोकतांत्रिक देशों के रूप में हमारा सहयोग न केवल ग्लोबल साउथ बल्कि पूरी मानवता के लिए प्रासंगिक है। हम मानते हैं कि ग्लोबल साउथ की चिंताओं और प्राथमिकताओं को वैश्विक मंचों पर रखना हमारा नैतिक दायित्व है। आतंकवाद के खिलाफ लड़ाई पर हमारी सोच समान है। जीरो टॉलरेंस एंड जीरो डबल स्टैंडर्ड्स हमारा स्पष्ट मत है कि आतंकवाद पर दोहरे मापदंडों का कोई स्थान नहीं है। हम आतंकवाद और आतंकवाद के समर्थकों का कठोर विरोध करते हैं।
In a special gesture, President Lula da Silva awarded Prime Minister Modi Brazil's highest civilian honor, the Grand Collar of the National Order of the Southern Cross. In the final leg of the five-nation visit, Prime Minister Modi visited Namibia. He met with President of Namibia, Dr. Netumbo Nandi-Ndaitwah, at the State House in Windhoek. Prime Minister offered India's support for quick impact development projects in areas of agriculture, information technology, cybersecurity, healthcare, education, women empowerment and child welfare. Prime Minister shared experience of India in using drones for agricultural purposes, a project which could bring great value to Namibia. Prime Minister thanked President Nandi-Ndaitwah for Namibia's support in the cheetah conservation project in India. He invited Namibia to join the International Big Cat Alliance. And at the invitation of Speaker of the National Assembly, Prime Minister Modi addressed the Parliament of Namibia. This was his record 17th address in a foreign nation's parliament. He spoke about how Africa is a priority for India.
Our development partnership in Africa is worth over $12 billion. But its real value is in shared growth and shared purpose. We continue to build local skills, create local jobs, and support local innovation. We believe that Africa must not be just a source of raw materials. Africa must lead in value creation and sustainable growth. That is why we fully support Africa's Agenda 2063 for industrialization. We are ready to expand our cooperation in defense and security. India values Africa's role in world affairs. We championed Africa's voice during our G20 presidency, and we proudly welcome the African Union as a permanent member of the G20.
And President of Namibia conferred on Prime Minister Modi the highest civilian award of Namibia, Order of the Most Ancient Welwitschia Mirabilis. He is the first Indian leader to be given this award. This was the 27th international honor bestowed upon Prime Minister Modi by a foreign government since he assumed office in May of 2014. On to our next story. When rising prices meet rising fury and tear gas fills the streets, on a day meant to honor democracy, a nation reaches a boiling point. Kenya's infamous Saba Saba protests have turned deadly. The president's tough talk is only turning up the heat. Ragini Sudhir Chaure brings you the story of Kenya's deadliest protests.
July 7th, 2025. Kenya's President William Ruto issued a stern directive to security forces to shoot protesters in the leg if they are caught targeting businesses or private property. This follows a violent wave of anti-government demonstrations that have left dozens dead and many more injured. At least 31 people were killed. These protests, sparked by widespread dissatisfaction with the government's economic policies and rising cost of living, have now become a flashpoint for something deeper. Anger, desperation, and calls for political change. Hundreds of protesters gathered outside Eagle Nursing Home on the outskirts of Nairobi, demanding to take away the bodies.
Going back home is not going to help us yet. Our children are being abducted and killed. Parents are looking for their children, but they cannot locate them.
The demonstrations mark the 35th anniversary of the historic Saba Saba, meaning 7/7 protests of the 7th of July 1990, which launched Kenya's push for multi-party democracy. But what exactly is behind this escalating crisis? Why are Kenyans taking to the streets in such large numbers? And how did a call for economic reform spiral into bloodshed? Kenya has been witnessing protests since weeks. With the deadly protests of July 26, public unrest in Kenya reignited in early July, with mounting intensity and widespread participation. On July 1st, spontaneous demonstrations broke out in major cities including Nairobi, Kisumu, and Mombasa, as thousands took to the streets to denounce the high cost of living, oppressive tax proposals, and alleged government mismanagement. By July 3rd, protest groups, mostly led by youth and civil society organizations, organized coordinated nationwide marches under the slogan "No tax without representation." On July 5th, clashes erupted between protesters and heavily armed police, leading to injuries and arrests. The situation escalated dramatically on July 7th when security forces opened fire on demonstrators in Nairobi's central business district, drawing international condemnation. Then on July 9th, President William Ruto gave his controversial directive to the police: shoot protesters in the leg if they destroy property, a move that sparked even greater outrage and intensified demands for government accountability. As of July 10th, tensions remain high, with fresh protests planned and human rights groups calling for independent investigations into police brutality.
Kwanza niliona ati wanasema I saw them saying that they won't wait for the elections in 2027. They want to plan chaos, plan protests, burn people's property, cause death in Kenya so that they can overthrow the Kenyan government before 2027. I dare them to try. They will not believe. They should try. Kenya is a democratic country. You cannot tell us you will cause chaos to overthrow the Kenyan government.
Human rights groups and the United Nations have strongly condemned what they described as excessive and disproportionate use of force by the Kenyan police. They argue that the government's response is inflaming, not easing the unrest. So what led to this moment? The protest began several months ago as peaceful demonstrations against the government's new tax laws and economic reforms, which many citizens say disproportionately hurt the poor and working class. Food prices have soared, fuel costs have spiked, and unemployment, especially among youth, remains alarmingly high. But as the cost of living crisis deepened, so did the frustration. Opposition leaders have rallied support across the country, calling for accountability and transparency, accusing the Ruto administration of betraying its campaign promises. But President Ruto is now pushing back, accusing his political rivals of inciting violence and attempting to remove him from power through illegal means. He warned them in no uncertain terms, stop sponsoring and using violent protests. You will not succeed in taking power by force. This language is raising alarms. Is Kenya headed towards deeper political instability? The original Sabha Sabha protests were a key moment that helped usher in multi-party democracy in Kenya after years of one-party rule. The response of the then government under President Daniel Arap Moi was brutal. Many protesters were arrested, while at least 20 were reportedly killed. Since then, Sabha Sabha has come to symbolize civic resistance and the fight for democratic freedom in Kenya. And today Kenya stands at a critical crossroads. The streets remain tense, the people remain defiant, and the world is watching. Is the president's approach a bold move to restore order or a dangerous crackdown on dissent? Can force bring peace, or will it only fuel more unrest? As the government vows to prosecute violent demonstrators, civil society organizations are calling for an independent inquiry into police conduct. Will dialogue and democratic processes prevail, or will the cycle of protest and repression continue? Only time will tell. Ragini Sudhir Chore's report for DD India.
What do you get when you mix a refugee monk, a Nobel Peace Prize, and a spiritual war with China, and a dream to live till 130? Well, you get Holiness the 14th Dalai Lama, who turned 90 last week. It still inspires the world with compassion. Talks have resurfaced over his likely successor. Ayushi Ahoja has more.
The Dalai Lama, one of the world's most iconic spiritual leaders, has celebrated his 90th birthday. Not in Taksar, his birthplace, but in exile. In India, in a Himalayan town called Dharamshala. In 1935, a 2-year-old Tibetan boy named Lama Thondup was recognized as the reincarnation of the 13th Dalai Lama. That toddler? Today, we call him His Holiness the 14th Dalai Lama. He was crowned spiritual leader by the age of 4, but by 15, he had a new job, navigating a Chinese invasion. By 1959, the tension boiled over. At midnight, disguised as a soldier, the Dalai Lama fled Tibet, crossing the snow-clad Himalayas into India. Behind him, his homeland was under siege. Ahead of him, a life in exile. India welcomed him. In the sleepy town of Dharamshala, he built a new capital for Tibet's culture, religion, and resistance. Now here's where it gets complicated. According to Tibetan Buddhism, death isn't an end, it's a transition. The Dalai Lama will be reborn. His spirit will continue in a new child. A search must begin to find him. But who gets to lead that search? In a landmark statement, the Dalai Lama made this clear.
If it's about Lama's reincarnation, when all the followers have unanimously said that the reincarnation should continue, then it's obvious that it will come. Since my 24th September 2011 statement, which states that responsibility for doing so will rest exclusively with members of the Garden Phodrang Trust, the office of His Holiness the Dalai Lama. They should consult the various heads of the Tibetan Buddhist traditions and the reliable oath bound Dharma protectors who are linked inseparably to the lineage of the Dalai Lamas. They should accordingly carry out the procedures of search and recognition in accordance with past tradition. I hereby reiterate that the Garden Phodrang Trust has sole authority to recognize the future reincarnation. No one else has any such authority to interfere in this matter.
This is what China had to say.
The reincarnation of the Dalai Lama must adhere to the principle of domestic search, golden urn draw, and approval by the central government, and be handled in accordance with religious rituals, historical customs, and national laws and regulations.
In easy words, Beijing wants to pick the next Dalai Lama. For China, this isn't about reincarnation, it's about control. Choosing the next Dalai Lama would allow Beijing to dominate Tibetans spiritually and politically. In fact, they've done it before. In 1995, the Dalai Lama chose a 6-year-old boy as the next Panchen Lama, the second highest Tibetan spiritual leader. 3 days later, that boy disappeared, vanished, kidnapped by Chinese authorities. China installed their own version of the Panchen Lama, groomed under communist rule. To this day, the real Panchen Lama has never been seen again. Over 6 decades in exile, the Dalai Lama had traveled the world, spreading messages of peace, tolerance, and mindfulness. He's blessed followers across continents, from Buddhist monks to Bollywood stars, from heads of state to Richard Gere. In 1989, the Dalai Lama was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize, not just for advocating Tibetan autonomy, but for preaching non-violence, even as his homeland was being crushed.
It's very clear that I have a special connection with Lord Avalokiteshvara. Even in my childhood, I had this feeling that I had a clear and strong connection with Avalokiteshvara, and I have been able to serve the Buddha Dharma and the beings of Tibet quite well so far. I still hope to live for over 130 years.
I still hope to live for over 130 years. But jokes aside, he's serious about succession. And he's made it official. The Garden Phodrang Trust, his inner circle, will lead the search. They will consult oracles, senior monks, and sacred texts, just as tradition demands. That's not negotiable. Not with Beijing, not with anyone. You can occupy land, you can erase maps, you can even name your own Lama. But you cannot manufacture belief. Reincarnation doesn't answer to regimes. As he turns 90, he's not just looking back but preparing us all for what comes next. Ayushi Ahuja's report for DD India.
And with that, we come to the close of this edition of Voice of the Global South. Thanks for watching. Namaskar.